Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Server-Side Web Development. This is Lecture 7. Today, we are going to be covering an introduction to Laravel. So we're going to jump from learning our databases and PHP to learning the Laravel framework. We'll learn about Laravel Routes and Views. So we're going to cover Routes and Views today. Announcement, sign-in sheet. We're not going to do the sign-in sheet anymore. After midterm. Forget about it. So I'm not going to do that anymore. Not on the announcements, but I do want to mention that there was a slight modification to your second half, or to the second half of the weeks for this course. Not major, just rearranged in the way we're handling some of the topics. That's for web production. And we'll talk about that. Web production had a significant change. We'll talk about that. The one big change, and this will affect students who are also taking web production, is that the final project, which was originally meant to be a crossover project, is no longer going to be a crossover project. Okay? I will go into more detail about why that is in web production, because the web production final is changing. Okay? But aside from that, the final is still as it is. There is no description of the final project yet. I'm going to work on that, hopefully have it all ready for you next week. All right, any other questions before we jump into today's topic? Everyone have a good break, time off? It's been like 3 weeks since we met. All right. Okay, so Laravel. We're going to talk about Laravel. So Laravel is a free open source PHP framework. It is also the most popular PHP framework today. It is built using object-oriented PHP. Now, we have not covered object-oriented PHP, and you really don't need to know much about it, but we are going to be utilizing some of its syntax. Now, you got to see some of that when we covered PDO, because PDO was also object-oriented, which means it was built off of classes. So is Laravel. So we're going to be using a lot of classes and objects when we work with Laravel. Laravel is also built off of the model view controller architecture. Okay, so what this does is it splits up basically the roles of your project into 3 categories: a model, a view, and a controller. So the model is what covers, models cover data, so that's our database essentially. Views are what the user sees, and the controller is the logic of your application. So we split those all up, and you'll see how that works as we cover those different categories. So in addition to that, Laravel also supports routing, which we're going to be covering today. Very, very powerful, very, very cool. Models, views, controllers, obviously, as well as authentication. These are all things that we're going to be covering over the next few weeks. In addition, Laravel also comes with a templating engine. Okay, so we will be using Blade, which is the templating engine that comes with Laravel, that will build our views. Okay, so it's a way of writing intermixing HTML and PHP in a way that's a little bit cleaner than we'd seen before. In addition to Blade, there's also Artisan, which is a CLI, command line interface, which allows us to create controllers and models more quickly, as well as do other tasks that we need to do in Laravel. And we'll be touching on that a little bit as it comes up. We're going to be working with Laravel 6.x. I don't know which one version it is, whatever version they're currently on. But it's version Laravel 6. And I wanted to bring this up because Laravel 7 comes out tomorrow, I've heard. So that's the industry. Okay, so what I'm teaching you now is going to be out of date. Not really. What we're teaching you is some pretty basic stuff and hasn't changed since Laravel 1. So the new Laravel 7 version isn't that much different. They're adding some new stuff. So not too much different, but just note that we're learning Laravel 6 here. Laravel 7 is supposed to come out tomorrow, but will be coming out very soon. Just be aware of that. Okay, installing Laravel. We're actually going to install it. So if we go out to the course website, mdac.github.io, and we go to server-side web development, so that's /MTM6405, and we'll go to content page, and we go to week 9, right? So we're on week 9 now, Laravel Routes and Views. There are 2 pages right in the topics, installing for macOS, installing for Windows. You have 2 very different ways to install Laravel, so choose for your operating system. Okay, so if you go for Mac, you're going to be using Composer to install Laravel. So you got a couple commands to enter and to run through. If you are on Windows, you are going to be using Laragon to install Laravel. And for that, you just have to open the menu option and just click the... Oh, you do have to change your database route. So for, real quick, on Windows, if you're using Laragon, you need to update your password. We updated the password through MySQL. I didn't realize that Laragon had a way of doing that directly until I tried to do this, and it told me I couldn't do it. So you have to change your password. Just change it to root. It will set it to root, and then Laragon knows about it. So that's what these are showing you. And once you do that, then you can just quickly install Laravel. So just follow the instructions. Let me know if you have any problems. We'll spend the next however long it takes to get this done. So once you have Laravel installed, we will continue and we'll talk about Laravel routes. So install Laravel. All right, so hopefully everyone has successfully gotten Laravel installed, and hopefully it wasn't too painful. You will need to do that anytime you want to create a new Laravel project, though. Fairly straightforward. Okay, so now that we have Laravel installed, let's go ahead and take a look at the first 2 components, which is routes and views. Okay, so the first of the 2 is routes. All right, so routes are one of the most fundamental features of Laravel and probably one of the most powerful. They're a way of setting up friendly URL schemes that will respond to HTTP verbs. Okay, so if you remember your HTTP requests, we really have only talked about 2 of them, which is GET, which is sending, anytime you type anything into the URL, that's a GET request. So we're sending for a GET request, give me something. And then there's a POST request, which is typically when you use forms. You send it over POST. So there's HTTP verbs. There's other verbs as well, which we will talk about later on in the course. But there's also delete and update and push and all these others. But we'll talk about them later. Just note that we can use these HTTP verbs along with the URL scheme to tell Laravel to display certain views. Okay, and that's all done with routes. Routes are defined in the root/web.php file. Okay, we haven't had a chance to actually look what Laravel did, and we will in a moment. Just note that in that big structure that it's created, one of those files is a web.php file, and that's where our routes will go. All routes will start with the root class. Okay, so remember, Laravel is an object-oriented programming, is built off of object-oriented programming. So everything we work with is a class. So we'll use the root class, and that's followed with a static method. Okay, and that static method will match the HTTP verb we're using. You'll get to see an example here. Each method will take a URI, which is the path we want to, the relative path we were looking for, and then a callback function. The URI is the path that gets entered into the browser after our domain. Okay? And then the function will tell basically what the value that gets returned by that callback function is what gets displayed in the browser. Now, it might be just a string. It might be a view instance. Okay? The view function is used to display view instances. okay? And views are stored in view files. We'll get to cover this a little bit more when we talk about views. All right, view files are stored in the resources/view folder. Okay, so let's take a look at some code. So here are a couple different routes. So the first route, turn on my pointer here. So the first route here is, okay, so we have right here, we have our root class. Then we have our method. So we're using get. So we're looking for the get verb that's somebody's typing into the browser. They will trigger that. Most of the time, we're going to be using get. There's a few instances where we'll use different verb, and we'll talk about that later in the course. All right, but so here we're doing root, get, and then here is our UI. So just at the slash, so that's the home page. So if we're at the home page, we're going to call, this function gets called, and the value that gets returned will be displayed in the browser. So if we were to go to this and just go to the home page, all we'll see is the string hello world. That's what gets displayed to our browser. If we were to go to /welcome, what we'll get is the welcome view. So here's that view function, and here is the name of the view that we want to look at. When you loaded Laravel, what you are seeing is the welcome view. That's what the default setting. We're going to take a look at that here in a moment. So data can also be passed to a view. So we can see that we can display views, and data can be passed to a view as an associative array. That associative array is the second argument. So that first argument is the name of the view we want. The second argument is the data we want to pass to that view. Data is accessible in that view. So this is how we can change and alter that view by passing it different data. Okay? It's an associative array, and the keys will be turned into variables in the view. And then we can just call it like that. So here's an example. So here we have our welcome view again, our welcome root. So here's our welcome root, and it's displaying our welcome view. We're passing in an associative array. It just has one item in it with a key of name and a value of John. Inside our welcome view, okay, so this is stored in resources views welcome.blade.php. Inside of our welcome view, we could use that variable just like any other PHP variable. If this was, and this will output John. If this was Ted, it would output Ted. Okay? Now, this is using PHP, but this is a Blade file. You can use this PHP and Blade file, but you can also use Blade statements and directives. So another way of writing this would be like this. Okay? The two hashes, the mustache syntax, for those of you who are from web production, you've seen this a lot. We use that exact same syntax. We use this mustache syntax, and then we can output the variable. This has some benefits over just using echo as well. It has some security rules built in that will prevent people from entering in malicious code into our site. Okay? So this is part of Blade. This is the Blade display syntax. And we'll talk about Blade in a little bit more. Okay, so with routes, we can distinguish what we want the path to be and tell what view we want. But there are going to be times when we won't have an exact value we want for our route. We might want it to alter. So if you think about friendly URLs, I'm going to write it on here on the whiteboard. So if you think about friendly URLs, think about like WordPress, right? When we go to a blog post, it's the URL. Just going to do WordPress here. .com, right? And then we do slash, and then we have a post, right? My post. And this is the slug of the post we want. Well, we can do that same structure with our routes in Laravel. Okay, so we can have this first part, say post, slash, and then have this next part be variable. Okay, that's what route parameters are all about. Okay, so route parameters allow us to create a segment of our URL to be a variable, or to be variable, to take in more than one value, more than one different value. Okay, so the route parameters get passed to the callback function. So that function, they'll get passed to it, and then we can alter what we're displaying depending on what was entered into the URL. We can also make these route parameters either required or optional. You can have that. So again, here's another example. Here's our going back, a new route example here. So we have our route get, and here's our URI. So we have that /post/post. Notice the curly braces, single curly braces. That's an indication that we're talking about a route parameter here. This is going to take a value. It could be any value. That value gets passed to our function. Now we can call this whatever we want. This doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be the same. It can be whatever you want. It's just a parameter. Okay, so that parameter gets passed to our function, and its value can be stored. Okay, so here we have an associative array with 2 posts in it. So assuming that this was passed as post-1, then it would output this sentence. So that's, in a nutshell, how route parameters work. We're going to be using them a lot. We're going to be using routes a lot when we work with Laravel. All right, so let's go ahead and do this on our actual Laravel instance. All right, so hopefully everybody has Laravel installed and they have their browser open to it. You should get something like this. Mine's a little small, but you should have the page, the Laravel welcome page right here. Go ahead and find the Laravel folder that you've installed and open it up into Visual Studio Code. We're going to walk through that. I'm actually going to split these up together. So there's my page. Here's my code. Okay, so go ahead and open up your Laravel project. I'm going to walk through the structure here a little bit. Yes, if you're on Windows, Laragon will have it in the your Laragon folder under www, and then whatever you called it. On the Mac, it depends on where you told it to install it. Somewhere in your sites folder, hopefully. Okay, so I'm going to walk through the folder structure for Laravel really quick. We're going to be spending a lot of time with it, so but I'm going to just pop through a few of these. The first folder, if we start with our folders first, we have the app folder. The app folder is where our controllers will live, as well as our models. So we're not going to be talking about models and controllers today, but we will be talking about them next week. And that's where they will live. There's a lot of other stuff as well in there that we won't really be working with in this course. But they're more advanced stuff, and you will be using those if you continue on using Laravel. Okay, so that's the app folder. Just note that's where your controllers live. Controllers and models. So there is already a model created. Here's that user.php. That's a model. We'll talk about models again next week. And there's some controllers built as well. All right, Bootstrap is mostly just a folder for Laravel. We won't ever work with Bootstrap, so you can just ignore that one. Same with config. Inside the databases folder, this is where our migration and seeds will go. We'll talk about migrations a little bit in this course, but for the most part, we won't be using migrations and seeds because we'll be using a database that's already been created for us. The public folder is the folder that will be, that's the folder that the user actually enters in. That's the folder the user sees. So anything you want the user to be able to see is going to be your public folder. When you deploy your Laravel site, the public folder is the folder that, again, the users see. That's where we're going to point to. Everything else will be outside of that. This helps keep your site secure. People can't be poking around, can't get access to anything. Everything you want people to be able to have access to will be just inside this public folder. Resources folder is where we can keep our uncompiled source files. So for JavaScript, for Sass, those types of files. We'll also have our view files in there. So our blade files, which we're going to be talking about a little bit more later, they will be inside the resources under the views file. After resources is our routes folder. Again, this is where our routes are going to go. We're going to be working with routes. You'll notice there's multiple route files. In this course, we're only going to be working with web.php. That's for your typical site. If you want to build an API with Laravel, which is very popular to use a web service API, you would store those in the API.php file. But again, in this course, we're not going to be working with that. We're just going to be working with the web.php. The rest of these are all for Laravel. There's storage. Again, this is for Laravel to add caching and working with that. Test is if you want to test your Laravel instance. We won't be doing unit testing in this course. And vendors is where all the third-party vendor stuff is stored. There's probably a bunch of stuff in there because Laravel uses a lot of different code from many different people, and that's all being stored in the vendor. Okay, so the main ones we're going to be working with in this course are going to be app, the app folder, the resources folder, and the routes folder. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's Laravel folder structure. Let's go ahead and open up the routes folder, and let's open up web.php. Okay, so you'll notice that there is a single route that's already there. And if we look at it, we can see that it has the route class available. And then it has these two colons. That's an indication that we want to call a static method. Again, that's object-oriented PHP. That's how it works. So this is the class name. This is grabbing a static method. We're doing the get method. And then we have our URI, which is just a slash, so that's the home page. And then we have our function. This is our callback function. And the value that gets returned is what's being displayed. Okay? And that is why we get this, because it's showing us the welcome view. We could change this if we get rid of this welcome view, and we just do hello world. And save that. We can go back to our page, we refresh. All I get is hello world. And that's because this route is telling Laravel what to display. And I switched from displaying the welcome view to just displaying hello world. Okay, I'm going to undo that because I want it to view the welcome page. All right, so we see that we can do that, how the route changes. Let's go ahead and see how we can pass data to this welcome view. So we want to look at the welcome view. I'm going to open this back up. And to open up the welcome view, we can go to the resources views folder. And here's the welcome.blade.php. Okay, we'll open that up. So take note that we're just calling welcome here as the name. You don't have to include, when you work with the view function, you don't have to include the blade.php. Laravel automatically does that for us. We just have to do the base name, so welcome. All right, so this is the page that we're seeing. Refresh. Oh, I lost my. There it is, that's the page we're seeing. We can even test this by changing Laravel here. We can say hello. If you refresh, well, why is that working? Oh, I changed the title, thank you. Changed the wrong thing. There we go, it's down here. Hello, gotta go further down. Okay, so there we go, we got hello. So we can see that we're making changes to this, they change the display. Now, if we wanted to send data to this, to alter this message, we can do that by passing an associative array from our root to the view. Okay, so from our root, if we go back to our root, we can add an associative array after welcome. So I'm just going to do a set of square brackets. We can do name here. And we can pass it in a name. We can save that. Now, if we go back to our welcome.blade.php, we can now use that data. So this array, Laravel is going to convert this array, and it's going to convert this key to a variable. So it's going to be the same name. So I'm going to have a variable name with the value Michael. So I can use that in my view. So I can come back here, and I can do hello, and I'm going to add a comma. And then I'm going to do that must-have syntax, the two curly braces. And I'm going to do $name. We'll save that. Go back to our browser, we'll refresh, and we can see that we get a different message. Now, we can change the name. We can change this to class. Refresh. Say it's a hello class. So that's how we can pass data to our view. And that's what we're going to be spending a lot of time doing. Okay, we'll have our callback functions, and eventually our callback functions will be called to controllers, and controllers will actually be handling all that. But eventually what we'll do is we'll get the data we want, and then we'll pass it to the view, and the view will display it. Okay, so in our model view controller paradigm, we'll talk about this a little bit more next week, we'll have, again, our view, our controller sits here, model sits here, and our view is over here. Okay? So the controller will decide, and our route will be here. So route will call up to the controller will call our database, get the values, and then pass it to our view. Okay? We're separating things out. Makes it easier to maintain, and it makes us easier to change out one of the components and keeping the rest. All right, so far we've added our root, we've added our we've altered the root. We've made the root point to a view. We've altered the view. We've passed some data. Let's go ahead and work with root parameters now. So we can change what we see based off of what we type in the URL. OK, so I'm just going to copy this root right here. And we're going to paste it down. And I'm going to add in a welcome here so that it goes to the welcome page. Right? So right now, this is just going to the slash. That's the home page. But if I do /welcome, then I should be able to view this same page by typing in /welcome. Okay? And I get the exact same page because I'm still pointing to that welcome view. Now, what if I wanted to alter this? Rather than saying class here, I want to alter it based off of what I passed through the URL. Well, I can do that by using that root parameter. So I can do another question mark here, or another slash. And now in a single curly brace, I'll put in name. And now this section of my URI is going to get passed to my function. So I'm going to give it the name of name. And now I can change class here to name. So the value that gets pasted or gets passed to the URL is going to get passed to the view, and the view is going to display it. Everyone see how that works? So now if we do another slash, so we have welcome slash, and then we can give it, type in Michael again. See if we get hello Michael. Okay, class, hello class. All right, now this is a very, very simple, impractical example, but you can kind of see how this can go and how this can get to be really powerful, especially when we start tapping into that we can make database calls off of what is being entered into the URL. and then displaying that data. All right. Any questions about views? It is, right, it is in resources, views, welcome.blade.php. We added, right, we changed this said Laravel before, and we switched it to hello, comma, and then added our mustache syntax, name. Laravel has a lot of files in it. By the way, there's about 5,000 files in the Laravel project, give or take. It can get cumbersome to try and dig through the directory. So it's a good idea to start using your quick open with VS Code. So that is the command Control P, and then you can just start typing in what you're looking for. So if I'm looking for web.php, I can hit the enter, it'll open up. Okay. Good idea to start getting your muscle memory into using that, especially when we start getting into these frameworks which have lots of files and you need to look for them. All right, any questions about using routes? They're relatively simple, but incredibly powerful. All right, let's move on then to our views. Okay, so with Laravel views, which we've already seen a little bit, they are part of the model view controller architecture. And this is the view part is the part that the user will see. Okay? So again, MVC provides, I already discussed this a little bit, separation of tasks, so the data, which is the model, the interface, which is the view, and the logic, which is the controller. Okay? So we're separating those tasks between those three components. The idea of doing this is it allows us to pull out one of the components without affecting the other two. For example, if we wanted to redesign our site, the model and controller can be left just fine, and we just have to change the view. If we moved our data to a different database, all we have to do is change the model. The rest gets left the same. Okay? They're unaffected. If all that was intertwined, it would require a lot more programming. That's the benefit of model view controller, and it's a very popular architecture across multiple different programming aspects. All right, so the views are used to display what's in the browser. Okay? And again, I said this before, views are stored in the resources views directory. Now, view files are either, in Laravel, view files are either PHP files or Blade files. Either one is acceptable. By default, as we saw in our welcome.blade.php, Laravel will look for Blade files. But again, you can use welcome.php and it will still load just fine. Okay, but we're going to be spending some time learning Blade because it does give us some benefits that plain PHP does not have. All right, so the Blade templating engine is a PHP templating engine, and it is included in Laravel out of the box. Okay, so it comes with Laravel. And what Blade does is it has multiple statements and directives which help simplify creating the templates. So we worked with PHP for the first couple of weeks, and we had to constantly open and close PHP tags, and we wrapped it around our HTML, and it got to be a little cumbersome. Well, Blade takes that away because we don't have to do those PHP tags. It allows us to do pretty much everything we can do with PHP without the need of those PHP tags. Now, with that said, you can use PHP tags in a Blade template. They work fine, as well as PHP functions, because Blade will eventually be compiled down to PHP. So what we're writing is a little script, a little page that then gets compiled down to PHP. All right, so let's take a look at some Blade. So we already saw this example before, where we can just output a variable using double curly braces. Okay? And this does have some benefits over just a simple echo statement. Now, Blade also has directives for handling control structure. Okay, so this is your if statements and your for loops and that type of stuff. Okay, so we have the directives for if statements. So we have all directives start with the @ symbol. So we have @if, @else if, @else, end if. Okay, so these are different directives which allow us to do the conditional statements, the if conditional statements. We also have directives for loops. So we have for and for each. Just note that we have to do @for and @end for and @for each and @. Okay, and they get wrapped around HTML. So we're going to see here an example. So here's an example of using it with just the if statement. We have our if, and then there's that is set. That's just a PHP function. It works fine inside of Blade. And we're just checking to see if name is set. If it is, then we'll output hello name. Otherwise, we're just going to output hello guest. Fairly straightforward. But you can see that we didn't have to open and close those PHP tags. But it's relatively the same. But saving us that code, saving that kind of extra syntax, cleans up our page. Here's an example using the loops. Again, it's pretty much the same except for the PHP tags. Removing those PHP tags makes the whole template look a little bit nicer, a little bit easier to read. Okay, so if all Blade was doing was giving us that, it probably wouldn't be a whole lot of, it's like, maybe I'll use Blade, maybe I won't. But there's another benefit that Blade does. And that is it allows us to create master layout pages. Okay? And it does this using a couple different directives. The first directive is the section directive, which allows us to define sections in our layout. Okay? So this is the header section. This is the footer section. Here's the nav section. Okay? So it allows us to define sections. The yield directive allows us to then display content in those sections. Okay, so if our master file says, okay, so this section is for the page body, and that's all it says is this is the section for it, in our child layout that's going to inherit the master page, it can then insert whatever data that it needs to. We also have the show directive, and the show directive, what it does is it allows us to end a section and then display that section immediately. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Here's what a master layout could look like. All right, so we notice right at the top, we have my pen out here. So right at the top here, inside of our title, so we have the app name, and then we have the title. This is the page title. We're using this yield here to say we want to yield out the title of the page. Okay. Then we have a section that we're defining here. So this sidebar section that's being defined. And this show directive is saying, okay, define this section and then display it. So this is the master sidebar will be displayed. Okay, and then right here, we're defining we're displaying the content right here. Okay, so this is what the master page would look like. And, I guess I got another slide here. So I would go to the child page. So just note, that is what the master page looks like. Now, if we want to extend that master page, if we want to then create a child page off that master, we can use the extend directive. And this extend directive allows us to inherit everything that's inside of that layout. In this case, the section directive will be used to inject content into that master page. And we'll use the end section to end it. Okay? The parent directive will allow us to then append. So when you do the injection, it will override whatever's in that section unless you use the parent directive, which allows you to include whatever the parent data is. So here's what the child. Okay, so if I got this set up right, here's the master, here's the child. Okay, so here's the child page. We're going to extend that master page using the extends directive. And then we're going to update that title. So remember at the very top we had that yield title. Well, now we're declaring that section. And we want to update the yield for title, and here's the value we want. So when this gets updated, it will have that specific page title. Here's our sidebar section. So remember in the master, right here's our master, we have that section and we have this show. So that's going to automatically display this. Oh, the wrong way. So with our title, we're declaring that section, but then we're providing content that we want to have into it. We want to include the parent's content, but we want to append this content as well. Okay, so note that we don't have to be inside of this section directive. It can be between the section. The content can be between. Okay, and here we're updating the section content. So this is showing you different ways of how we can create layouts. And this is a very simple example, but you can create very complex layouts using the Blade system. And then you tie into everything else that we're going to learn later on, and we can create some pretty sophisticated sites with Laravel. Relatively little work. All right, so let's go ahead and do a hands-on here. So let's go back to our code here, and let's make some changes to the way things are set up. So throughout the next couple of weeks, what we're going to be working on is we're going to be building a movie site using the Movie Mayhem database. Now we're not going to use the database today because we haven't learned how to integrate databases with Laravel yet. We're going to be learning about that next week. Yes, you will need to install Laravel. Okay, so we will be learning about that next week, but we're going to start setting up our project now. So let's go ahead and kind of alter our structure here. So I'm going to I'm going to create a new view. I'll start with that. Create a new view. I'm just going to call this home.blade.php. And I'm just going to give this a basic HTML structure. And I'm going to give it the name of Movie Mayhem. And I realized I wanted to stop here. So when we created this, we can create this simple structure. But we know that every page that we create, every layout page, every view is going to have this same structure. So this is where that master layout will come in. So really what we want is to create this as our master layout. So I'm sorry, we don't really want this to call this home. We want to rename it as layout.blade.php because this is going to be our master layout. And because this is our master layout, we're going to have all of our HTML structure here, as well as any style sheets or JavaScript that we want to include. We're not going to include any of that today, but we could. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to add in a page name here. So I'm going to do Movie Mayhem, and then I'm going to do the yield. And we're going to do title. And then I'm going to do another thing here. I'm going to do yield, and we'll do this, call this content. Okay, we're just going to do that. Those two things. So we used yield title and yield content. So this is just the very basic structure of what HTML looks like. And then each other layout we create will extend this layout and alter the content. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that once you have that, and let's go ahead and create a new file here. And the first one, this one should be home.blade.php. Do apologize. Yes. I'm sorry. Thank you. I before E, right? Okay, so make sure you spelled yield right. Then we'll go back to home page. And now we can add in the content that we want to display here. So for our home page, we're going to add a section. And we want this one to go for the title. And we're just going to give it a title of home. And then we'll do another section here. We'll call this one content. And we're just going to give this an H1 of this is section. Okay, and that's it. That's all that would be inside of this layout. Okay, because, oh, you know what? This isn't going to work because I forgot one thing that we need to do. At the very top, we need to extend the other layout. Okay, so at the very top, we need to extend it. So we do extends, and we want to extend layout. All right, so now we save that. We have our layouts created. So we have our master layout, which is called layout, and then we have our home page, which is extending our layout and updating the content. So let's go ahead and alter our routes so that we're actually pointing to these. So let's go back to web.php, and let's alter this home route right here to go not to welcome, but to go to home. Okay, and we'll get rid of that data. Just do that. Okay, so now if we go back to here, we can go to our URL. We just want to go to the home page. We should see this is the home page. Notice it says Movie Mayhem-Home in the title. So we've successfully created our layout. Now we can add another layout, another view. So again, this is going to be a movie site. So the home page would display all the movies, and then we might have a details page. So we'll create a new file. We'll call this one details.blade.php. And for this one, it will be the title. Our first thing we need to do is extend the layout, right? So extend layout. To that symbol's there. And then we want to change our title. So we'll do section and title. And for the value of this is going to be the value of our movie. So we're going to pass that data in from our root. So we're just going to put in movie here for now. We'll get that movie here in a moment. And then for our content, it will be actually the content of the movie. Whoops, I put content. I'm in section, content. And we're just going to put an H1 here. And again, this is going to be the movie title. All right, so there is our details page. Let's save that. And let's go back to our web.php. And we're just going to copy, we'll copy this route here. And now for this route, we're not going to have anything before it we're doing a slash, and then we're going to have our root parameter, because this will depend on what movie they're typed in, right? So this will be just a movie title that gets typed in. So just put in movie, and then we'll pass that to our function in the movie variable. Now our view here, rather than being home, will be the details page. And we're going to pass it whatever got typed into the URL. I'm going to pass that with movie $movie. Let's go ahead and get rid of the, I'm going to comment out this other route so we don't get any confusion. Okay. Yep. So now that we have that routes created, you should be able to save it if you've managed to follow along, because I'm moving very quickly. You should be able to save it and then go to it and just type in a movie title, and it should show up. The movie title should just, whatever you typed in the URL, should appear on the page. So in a nutshell, very briefly, that's how Blade layouts and templates work. We're going to be working with Blade more as we add more throughout, as we continue in the course, and we learn about databases and controllers, and combine them all to create dynamic websites. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save web here. I'm going to go back. Now, right here, I'm on the home page, but if I go through the URL and I type in a movie title, The Godfather, right? Oh, I didn't put that inside of curly braces, that's why. Need it in double curly braces. There we go. So now, most likely we wouldn't want to have them just type in a name like this. We'll have a slug of some kind when we actually build this site out. But you can kind of see how this will work once we get everything put together. Any questions so far about Laravel? Your final project will be built in Laravel. So it is important to grasp. All right. Let's wrap up. No, I don't have it because I just made it up right in class. Okay, so assignments, midterm reflection. So your midterm is due next week, yes? No, that's for web production. Yeah, I'm getting them confused too. So yeah, too many classes. Next week. Midterm for this class is due next week. I'm pretty sure it's due next week. But along with your midterm, you need to submit a midterm reflection. This is just, yeah, so you're going to reflect on the project you built, and you're going to write about how you completed the project, what problems you faced completing the project, and what you learned about the project, okay? So that's what you're going to be doing for that. This is a participation exercise, so it's just kind of a check mark. It's mostly to kind of think about what you've done. It's a good way to learn, okay? And this is due next Monday. So it's due the same time as your midterm. Okay, so those are due. Next week we're going to be talking about Laravel models and controllers. With the controllers, we're going to cover controllers just a little bit, just enough to actually use them, because they're relatively simple. They're just basically, we'll talk about creating classes and then functions. The big part is going to be spent with models, which is connecting Laravel to our database and then responding to that database. So that's what we're going to be covering next week. Just as a reminder, your hybrid number 3 for this class is due tonight. So that is due tonight, so don't forget to. We still have a little over an hour of class left, so hopefully you can use that time to work on your midterm project. Are there any other questions, though, before I let you go to work? Okay, so that's it. We'll see you next week. Go to work.